the fact that the strike is now being described in those terms as a mistake, as an error, doesn't really absolve Israel from the fact that these actions seem to fly in the face of what the ICJ said on Friday. There's been a lot of debate about exactly what the ICJ said. There's some ambiguity in the exact wording that the court chose to use, referring to the need for Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. But I actually think that those ambiguities have been kind of superseded by what we've seen at the weekend, because under any reading of the court's decision, whether you adopt the broader reading that this demanded a complete halt of the offensive in Rafah, or a more limited reading that allowed for certain activities to continue, this is, as you say, exactly the type of scenario that motivated the court to act. This is the type of risk that the court was seeking to prevent. And the strike in Rafah and the entirety of events in Rafah over the weekend, I think, demonstrate that the court was right to understand that the military offensive in Rafah simply seems to be incompatible with protecting the rights that are at issue in this case.
So in terms of, part of what the ICJ seem to be wanting is this condition of war that says every effort has to be made to protect citizens. Is this something that you believe Israel did in this case?
Well, there's a lot of information yet to be gathered. We see the horrific images and read the horrific stories. So there's no question that what happened is horrific. The exact details of what precautions Israel took, whether it was using precision guided missiles or not. I mean, and there's some debate about whether the strike was in a humanitarian zone or outside of the zone. I think all of that is a little bit beside the point. The strike took place in the midst of a tent camp, apparently. The type of consequences that have resulted from that strike, even if directed against legitimate military targets, seems to have been foreseeable. So this raises serious questions, and whether or not this fits within the contours of international humanitarian law, which seems like a big stretch, it clearly flies in the face of the ICJ order, which put further constraints on Israel's ability to act.
Yeah. What impact might this have on the current application underway for arrest warrants on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Defense Minister?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to have any direct impact on what's happening at the ICC. This is a separate parallel process to the ICJ case, of course, and the arrest warrants currently being sought are specific to certain crimes that focus specifically on the starvation allegations relating to this conflict. So while all of our attention is on this particular strike in Rafah on Sunday, this really is one additional incident among scores of incidents, rafts of evidence that the ICC prosecutor and his team are looking at. And so while it may contribute to decisions that are made in the future about additional charges that might be sought or other suspects who might be named, I don't see it really as having any direct impact on the current process for seeking approval of the arrest warrants that are being sought right now.
Yeah, very separate issues. Having worked with the International Court of Justice, what do you make of the efforts to stop Israel? They have said they're going to continue regardless. And of course, we know Hamas was firing rockets at Tel Aviv, so they could easily argue that this was a reasonable response.
Well, I don't know that they can argue very successfully that it was a reasonable response, but certainly the fact that Hamas continues to attack Israel, to fire rockets indiscriminately, these are war crimes in their own right. It does nothing, in my view, to help South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ. And as you suggest, it feeds into several lines of argument that Israel has made in arguing against the very type of order that the court imposed, this idea that you can't put us in a position where we can't defend ourselves. But more broadly, though, I mean, the court is dealing with a difficult situation with very different factual narratives on the ground, trying to also maintain a certain degree of consensus within the bench. I think at some point, though, people need to also have realistic expectations about what the International Court of Justice can do and what any legal process can do here. The court can help to set out what the law requires, and those decisions can put pressure on Israel and third parties about how to conduct themselves going forward. But ultimately, enforcing what the court says or making sense of what the court says falls to actors in the political sphere.
Yeah, and to that point, the US is a big player. We know that they are not a party to the ICC, but do you feel that at some point the US has to show its weight to support, to support the International Court of Justice to prevent Israel from this kind of indiscriminate killing when it knows that this is a highly densely populated area with refugees?
I think the U.S. position right now on Rafah is disappointing and inadequate. We've heard the U.S. at various points over the past few weeks draw what seemed to be a kind of red line about a military offensive in Rafah. The U.S., after consultations apparently between the U.S. and Israel last week, stepped back on that a little bit and seemed to suggest that they had assurances that the way Israel was going to proceed didn't cross that red line. And now we see the U.S. Describing what has happened at the weekend as heartbreaking, but still not really taking a clear position on whether this now, in fact, crosses that red line. And as far as I know, we haven't seen the U.S. say anything about the importance of Israel respecting the International Court of Justice's decision, even if Israel staunchly disagrees with that.
Indeed.
And so, of course, I would like to see the United States stand up for the importance of the ICJ as a critical actor in the international system.
Michael, so appreciate your expertise on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.